Hey, it's the Mr. Productivity Podcast. Welcome back. Today, I have Wayne Turmel on the show. He's a leading expert on remote work and virtual leadership with 25 years of experience in the field. As a co-founder of the Remote Leadership Institute and author of 12 books, including The Long Distance Leader and The Long Distance Teammate, Wayne has helped countless organizations and individuals thrive in the digital workspace. Wayne, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, man. This is great.
And I am old enough, and I'm going to guess you are old enough too, to remember when there was no computers, when there was no cell phones, when there was no social media, and there was no such thing as remote work because you had to go to a job because otherwise you couldn't get the job done.
Well, that is not technically true, my friend. Remember, Genghis Khan ruled half the world and never held a WebEx meeting.
I stand corrected.
Julius Caesar did great out in the field. It's when he went back to the office that things went sideways. So it's always been doable, but it hasn't always been done. How's that?
That's, and when I say I stand corrected, I literally am standing at my standing desk. So I am literally standing corrected. So I appreciate that, Wayne. So let's just jump into the deep end, because this is one of my thoughts. When we had this COVID pandemic, a lot of people were forced to work from home. And I believe that, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this. My theory on this: some people can work from home. Some people need to be in the office. What say you?
That's probably true. Just as we all have work styles, we all have personality styles. And sometimes it's not even like an intrinsic failing, right? Like I failed to work from home. Not everybody has the right setup. I mean, work from home in Asia, for example, is a fantasy for most people, because if you live in a Tokyo apartment, what's a spare room? Right? It's just not possible to do that. So, yeah, I think that there are people who work better with other human beings around. There are people who think they work better alone and probably need other humans and guardrails and things around them. And then there are those like you and me. I mean, my first big boy job, this is how long ago it was. My first project was rolling out email to my company. We didn't have it before then. And I had a remote team because some people were in LA with me, but I had people all up and down the West Coast. So this is something that I have done in one form or another for 30 years, but not everybody had done it. Not everybody thought it was possible for their particular job. While it had been growing, remote work was growing at 25, 30% a year over year. This pushed us across the Rubicon. And then suddenly it changed. All these people who didn't think they could work remotely suddenly found that they liked it very much, thank you. And others couldn't wait to get back to the office. And so we're in this weird figuring it out stage, which is interesting and challenging and frustrating and weird.
So let's talk about the dynamics of working from home. Now, I am recording this in a spare bedroom of my home. It's just my wife and me. We have 2 pups. And so we have a 3-bedroom house. And I'm like, this will make a good studio. It's got the carpet on the floor, so I don't have to, the echoes and bouncing around. But I think people can also, because I love working from my kitchen table. My wife and I work out there. Our workstation can look out at the street. So I think that even if you have a small studio apartment, now if you have a big family, this won't work. But if it's just you probably can work on the sofa as long as you don't have to be doing presentations and stuff like that. So I think that I don't like people making excuses. I think that you can get creative and still work from home effectively.
Well, yes, and I think there are two parts to what you said. One is there is the sense of professionalism, right? Yes, you can do your presentation on a couch, but is that the way you want the VP of your biggest customer to see you and think of you? So there is that piece of it. And the other thing that you mentioned is a lot of work can be done anywhere. It doesn't necessarily mean your home. But that being said, it takes discipline to be a professional. It takes discipline to manage your time. And to be honest, a lot of us over the last 100 years had that bred out of us. We kind of had this thing where you go to work and your time is your own until you hit the door, and then you put in an honest day's work for an honest day's wage. And then when you leave, your time is your own again. And so the guardrails were there. You didn't have to think about what I was wearing when, what am I working on? It was done for you. Now, if you're going to be successful working from home, if you're going to be highly productive, you own your time more than you did before. And there's something that we've been calling the Spider-Man paradox, which is, if you know your comic book geekdom, with great power comes great responsibility. Working from home gives you an incredible, or working remotely, gives you an incredible amount of power, control over your time, control over what you're working on, when, to some degree. But it means you need to be responsible for getting your work done to the quality that you are hired to do that. It means hitting your deadlines. It means wearing big boy clothes when you got to wear big boy clothes. And
I once saw a video about 2 weeks ago. Kevin O'Leary, he's famous from Shark Tank, and he goes on CNBC and these other networks, and he's got his suit on and his tie, and he posts the video. He posts a picture of him. I think it was on Instagram from the side, and he's wearing like Bermuda shorts because he only needs to be from a suit from the waist up. And I thought that was hysterical because it gave me another side of him. I got to see a different side of him, that he is kind of a corny guy like I am. And because I don't like wearing suits and I don't like being dressed up for anybody. And so I just thought that was interesting. So I wonder how many of these people who are doing interviews on major networks at home and they're sitting down, if they're wearing sandals and Bermuda shorts, we don't know because they're sitting down.
But probably a lot of them. I mean, full disclosure, yes, I am wearing a shirt with buttons, but it is our 117th 100-degree day here in Las Vegas. I ain't wearing long pants, right? But here's the thing. It takes a while. People think they can work dressed however they want to work, and it's not always true. Studies have shown that when people dress for work, and it doesn't mean you have to wear a suit and tie, but when they wear work clothes, they actually are more focused and more productive than if it's 11:30 and you're still in your AC/DC t-shirt and your bunny slippers. Now, it doesn't mean that nobody can be productive if they don't put on grown-up clothes. But I know for me, when I started working for myself, and like a lot of consultants, you know, my career started with all my stuff in a cardboard box going, guess I work for myself now. It took me a while to realize that since there's no structure, right? There is no 9 a.m. starting time, whatever. I needed to create my own structure in order to be productive. So now I get up, I check my email for any burning fires, but then I take a shower, I make the bed, I put on grown-up clothes, and now my day, the most productive part of my day, has begun. And it's a mindset, and it has allowed me to work from literally anywhere. But some of us have been raised in captivity so long that we don't know how to do that. And other people don't think they have the responsibility. Oh, I'm just as productive in my, bathing suit and my baseball cap as I am otherwise. And maybe that's true, but I'd be willing to put it to a test.
Well, I will tell you this, that I'm doing this interview. I'm wearing a t-shirt, shorts, and sneakers. This is my everyday outfit. And I remember, way before the pandemic, I decided I'm not wearing suits anymore. I'm either you're going to allow me to show up in sneakers, jeans, and a t-shirt, or don't hire me. Not a single person said no. And so this is who I am. I have to be comfortable. Now, I'm probably an outlier. I know a lot of other people maybe can't do this. For me, this is my work uniform. I'm very comfortable. Now, it's hot here in Houston as well. So when I'm not on camera, I'm wearing my tank tops. I would never show up for an interview or anything like that wearing a tank top, a coaching call. That I don't think that is appropriate. But for me, maybe it's I have more discipline because I am Mr. Productivity. I've been doing it for so long. It doesn't really affect my productivity no matter what I'm wearing, unless I'm wearing a suit. Then my productivity actually tanks because it's like, to me, it's like one of those straitjackets. Right. So for me, it has the opposite effect. But
that's great. I get that. And for you, that's great. But you got to remember two things. First of all, you are hyper focused on productivity. So your head is in the game at a different level than most mere mortals. The second thing is that you are a shameless entrepreneur. And so that's what drives you. Most people who work for a living are not type A entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And it's a little unreasonable to expect them to be, which is why as a leader of a team, you need to find out how do people work? Where's their head at? There need to be some conversations about how can the company, how can your employer help you be productive? And here's what you got to bring to the table. And if you don't have those conversations, I don't know any team that hasn't had bumps. I mean, at the beginning of COVID, a lot of people were surprised that productivity did not drop off a cliff. Well, there were two reasons for that. Number one is people were highly motivated. They want to keep their job. We're all in this together. I want my boss to continue to employ me. There's this thing going on. And so people pulled together. That was part of it. But the other thing was people were putting in way more hours than they used to. At the beginning of the pandemic, senior leaders were convinced that there was no way this was going to work. People won't work if they're not being supervised and looked at. And if left to their own devices, they'll spend all day at Target and the dog park rather than getting their work done. And it didn't happen that way. The biggest problem during the early days of the pandemic, first 6-8 months, we would say to people, hey, you're not commuting. You don't have to do all this stuff. What are you doing with that extra 2 hours, 3 hours a day? And the number one answer by far was working, because we didn't have the guardrails that going to work provide. And not everybody, if Kevin sends me an email at 10 o'clock at night, he has no expectation of me answering it at 10 o'clock. But if the relationship isn't great, or I don't know my boss real well, and he's sending me emails and my phone's blowing up at 10 o'clock at night, the natural Pavlovian response is to answer it. And so until managers and leaders started saying, knock it off, people were afraid not to answer the phone. Also, remember, this is the first time in history that we've had this electronic umbilical cord that doesn't leave us alone. And we haven't learned how to deal with that worth a darn.
I'm trying. I'm trying, but I'm only one voice.
We all are.
But I will tell you this, that if you work from home, if you're an entrepreneur, small business owner, you work from home, you're a solopreneur, please have office hours. This is something I learned from Cal Newport. My office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. I may check email, but when I send an email, I'll schedule it to send out between 9 and 4. But obviously, if you're working for a corporation, it may be gray lines. But if you can, as much as it is within your control, you need to have those guardrails. You need to say, okay, before 9 and after 4, that's my time. And I'll be working with my clients from 9 to 4. But a lot of people don't even think about that. And I'll be honest with you, the first time I read it, I forget what book I read about it in Cal Newport's, but I'm like, ooh, office hours. That's interesting, because if we don't, then are we on the clock or are we not on the clock? It's very gray throughout the entire day. And your family's going, is he working for the business or is he with me? So I have very black and white, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. That's my working hours. And that wasn't something I picked willy-nilly. It was after several years. I'm like, okay, when do most of my clients want me? 9 to 4. Yep. And so if you want an appointment at 6 o'clock, I may make an appointment at 6 o'clock, but it's a case-by-case basis for me.
Yeah, I work from 7 a.m. till 2, which sounds like, what the heck? I'm on the West Coast. Most of my clients are Central Time or Eastern Time, right? So that's their workday. I'm responsive to their workday. I am not a fanatic about that. I mean, there are days I work longer. But to your point, you had to learn to set those office hours because we are not equally productive every hour of the day. 100%. First of all, just because you're sitting in your chair doesn't mean you're productive, right? You can only focus for certain periods of time. You know that. You've been doing this show long enough. You can give 40 minutes of serious, hard focus, and then your brain goes, okay, I'm done. You should be able to choose if you are not tied to somebody who has you log in at a certain time and not, when you do your best work. I'm a morning person. I bang more stuff out by 9. I'm like that old Army commercial, right? We get more done before 9 a.m. than most people do all day. I'm watching that commercial. I'm going, yeah, me too. But that's a result of having learned that through hard experience, having trial and error, and having an employer that understands that there are times like Friday morning, first Friday of every month is our team meeting. And because the company is scattered all over the country, with the exception of me on the West Coast, that meeting happens at 7 o'clock Friday morning. Sorry, Wayne, you got to be on that meeting. They do not insist that I be shower ready. I usually am, because that helps wake me up and focus me. But I got to be there. There are other times where it doesn't matter if I'm synchronously there the whole time that my team is working, right? There's a couple hours a day that we overlap. That works perfect for us. If they say, yeah, you can work anywhere you want, but you need to be logged on by 9 a.m. Eastern and don't log off until 4, how much flexibility do you really have?
That's a good point. You mentioned deep work, and a lot of people say, I work 8 hours a day. Well, you're not deep work 8 hours a day. Cal Newport's not on social media, very rarely checks email, and he can occasionally reach 4 hours of deep work a day. Now, I want people to test this. I want you to set your watch for 5 minutes, and I want you to do nothing for 5 minutes. It's going to seem like 5 hours. And after you do that experiment, then really tell me, how much deep work are you really doing? Because we tell ourselves these stories. Oh, I'm doing deep work all day. No, you're not. Email's not deep work. Going to the break room's not deep work. Chit-chatting with people in the hallway is not deep work. If you're doing Slack messages or inter-office communications, that's not deep work. So we tell ourselves, oh, I started work at 7, stopped working at 6. I had a really productive day. And I always ask my clients, well, what did you do exactly? Not make up a story. And I say, the best thing you do is get a piece of paper and track your time. Most people are stunned that they actually don't spend as much time as they think doing deep work as they actually are. And some people come up with a big fat goose egg because they're distracted all day long. They're in email, they're on Slack messages. And so we all understand the importance. I don't think anybody doesn't understand the importance of deep work. But how much deep work are you actually doing during the day? And I've read various different studies, and they all quote something different. The point is, it's not nearly as much as people think it is.
Well, and don't discount that work that isn't deep work. Right? You got to answer your Slack messages, the ones that matter, right? You're going to spend time doing that. You're going to spend time talking to your coworkers. You're going to spend time in meetings. That's not a bad thing. And it doesn't mean that nothing is getting done. Mm-hmm. It's just there are times, and we all know this, when you've got your to-do list and you start checking stuff off and you are just banging stuff out, And that's great. And the endorphins are going crazy in your brain and going, look what a good boy I am. But we know that a lot of that stuff is not important. It's urgent. It's stuff that needs to be done, but it's not important. I find that if I dedicate an hour to writing a chapter in a book, to a client call that requires real focus, to working on courseware, I will then spend half an hour doing check off the boxes stuff. It frees my brain. I can focus. It's relaxing in its odd little way. And then I can go back and I can do some more focus work. So it's not like you're doing one or the other. In an ideal world, you're kind of drifting back and forth so that when you're focused, you can focus and you don't have that thing in the back of your head that goes, you really need to get that to Bob.
Let's talk about leadership, and let's get really practical of how you can be an effective leader for a remote team, because we see remote teams all over the country, all over the globe now, but not everybody is an effective remote leader. So why don't you walk us through a couple of must-haves that a leader needs to have in order to effectively lead a remote team?
Yeah, well, in the book, it's actually the long distance leader rules for remarkable remote and hybrid leadership. And we have these 19 rules, but rule number 1 is think leadership first, location second. One of the things that and it didn't surprise us in the least, is that people who are good leaders, I mean, we all know people who have their team all gathered around and can't lead their way across the room. If you think about what it takes to be a good leader, you need to coach, you need to set the vision, you need to delegate. You need to do all that stuff. People that were good leaders and suddenly found themselves working remotely found a way to be good leaders anyway. You found a way to coach your employees and give them feedback. You found a way to make sure that people knew what they needed to do and get the heck out of their way. So the first thing is just focus on the leadership. What needs to be done? Who needs to do it? What are the deadlines, the milestones? And then location matters a whole lot less. The second thing is that regardless of how hard we try and what good leaders we are, being remote does change the way that we communicate. Technology enables us to do a lot of things, but it doesn't do them for us. Let me give you the worst example that I know of. My wife was once fired by instant messenger. Now, I wish not everybody is seeing the face that your boy just made when I said that. But, I mean, it worked, right? She was unemployed at the end of the interaction. I suppose it worked. I think most sentient human beings would agree that that's a pretty lousy way to communicate with people, right? And that's an obviously terrible example, but let's take one we've all done. It's 4:00 on a Thursday. I need to give Mark some feedback. But man, you know what he's like. You know what? I'm going to send him an email and deal with him in the morning. We've all done that one because it's easy to do. So what that means is when you're thinking about how do I communicate with my team, with my teammates, with my customers, how do I do that? We need to be very intentional. Some communication needs to be very rich. If I'm having a coaching conversation with you, in a perfect world, we're one-on-one, face-to-face, across a table, having a cup of coffee, getting down into the weeds. If we can't do that, at the very least, we're going to be on webcam. You can see me. You can see my visual body language. I can see yours. It's as rich as we can do it over the circumstances. On the other hand, it's Alice's birthday. I don't need to go to every person individually and say, it's Alice's birthday. A Slack message to the team does the job just fine. The problem is that there are 100 communication styles and needs between those two things. And are we using the right tool at the right time for the right communication outcome? And that is real easy to rely on kind of our gut and what feels easy. which is why if you're a weasel who doesn't like confrontation, you can fire somebody by instant messenger. But that's not the way to have that conversation. And you know it, and I know it. So as a manager, I got to suck it up. And it might not be my preferred thing, but it's the way it's got to be. And we deal with this a lot unintentionally just because of who we work with. We have different generations in the workplace. And I know it's very HR and everybody kind of rolls their eyes when we get into the generations in the workplace conversation. But I have a 31-year-old daughter who seems unaware that telephones transmit voice. This is a constant source of conversation and consternation. But there are times when a text message does the job just fine. And there are times when it doesn't. Well, guess what, Gen X millennial person? Sometimes you got to suck it up and attend that meeting or make that phone call. But guess what, old dude? Sometimes just send the text message and let them get on with their lives. But if you don't have that conversation, right, as a team, when do we send a text message? When do we send an email? When do we use our webcam? When do we gather together? If you don't have that conversation, everybody's on their own agenda. And if you are a want to talk person and all you're getting is emails and texts, that person thinks they're communicating with you. They're communicating in their style, but it's not helping you. Sometimes you need to adapt to the other person's style. And, you know, one of my favorite quotes, Napoleon said, if you want to avoid war, you avoid the 1,000 little pinpricks that lead to war. Use your out of office update on Slack. It's not that hard. But if your light says you're there and I'm sending you messages and you're not answering them, it's going to start to annoy me. I'm going to start thinking you're avoiding me. You're not even there. Or you're working on something, you're doing some of that deep thought work, but you're not answering me. And I'm sending messages out into the void. How much does it say, do not disturb, I'm out of pocket till 2:00? How much drama would you prevent if your team just did that for each other?
And I think because we're talking about leadership, it's got to start from the top. It's got to start from the leader saying, okay, this is how we're going to run our organization. Don't hope in a prayer that it's going to work out. You have to determine what scenarios this requires an email, this requires a text, this requires Slack message. But I've seen other people, and they've shared with me, who work at companies, and there's no rhyme or reason. It's right. Just, you know, you don't want your doctor texting you that you have some devastating cancer, you're going to die next week. You want to go into the office and have him or her look you in the eye. So I understand. I'm tracking exactly what you're talking about, but I think that needs to start at the leadership level, and they need to have conversations like you say. And okay, this is how we're going to run our organization. This is how we're going to communicate with people. We're not going to just hope it happens.
Well, yes, and I'm going to modify what you said just a bit. It's certainly, if the people up top don't model it, don't buy into it, it's not going to happen. What I have found, though, is top-down mandates frequently don't work because they don't work. The people making the rules don't always know how the sausage gets made. So as a team, you should be having these discussions as a team, and then it's up to the leader to model and enforce those things. It's not like the leader wakes up one morning and goes, you know what, we should be using email for X, and sends out the dictate. But as a team, once you've talked about it and you've agreed, hey, this is when you do this, this is when you do this, now it's up to the leader to enforce it, coach it, model it. I mean, a big one we talked about earlier is that notion of you have learned to set the time for when emails get delivered. A lot of people don't do that. But why do you do that? Because you thought, hey, I just thought of this. Let me send this message while I'm thinking about it. But when it's arriving in somebody's inbox, that's a message from the boss. And we leaders forget the godlike power we have in the eyes of it. There is always a power discrepancy. So if you as a leader say one thing and model another, they are looking at what you're doing. They don't care what the rules are. They don't care what the guidelines are. They want to know what you're doing. It's funny because we forget, because we feel powerless and useless most of the time, we forget the power and influence that we really have. I mean, the scariest thing you can do to your team is send them a Slack message that says, "Have you got a second?" There is no scarier 4 words in the English language than "have you got 5 words," than "have you got a second?" Because to you, it's a perfectly legitimate request for information, right? I need to talk to you. Is this a good time? Can we talk? What are they thinking? Have you got a second? What did I do now? What am I in trouble for? I'm kind of doing something, but it's the boss and I can't tell her that I can't do it. So I'm going to drop what I'm doing and do this, which is not great for productivity. All you need to do is add a couple of words to that sentence. Have you got a minute? I want to talk to you about X. And if you've developed an honest, trusting relationship with your employees, it is perfectly acceptable to say, I can't do this right now. How's in half an hour or how's 20 minutes? Which is a perfectly valid response to a perfectly valid question. But if you don't have those conversations, if you don't think about the impact, it's real easy to cause drama where there doesn't need to be any.
You know, you talk about sending messages, like scheduling to send messages. iOS 18, their latest software update, you can actually schedule text messages. Now, This isn't available on WhatsApp yet or Telegram or Signal, but it'd be nice if, I don't know, I don't use Slack. Maybe Slack has that feature. Because this way, when the boss goes in there and it's like 10 o'clock at night and they're just trying to clear out their messages, they could send a message to Wayne or Mark and set it for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. So then I don't even have to stress out about it.
Yep. They're all getting there eventually. I mean, some of them already do that, some not. The ones that are mostly consumer apps like WhatsApp, they haven't done it yet, but all the business apps are doing it now because it just makes sense.
Yeah. And then, of course, you got over in France and the European Union, you can't even email or text your employees after working hours, which I have mixed feelings about that. I understand the logic of it, but I'm not big on mandates. I think we have too many laws and rules in the world. And so I think I'd like to see, my utopia is the leaders will recognize, okay, Wayne works from 9 to 4. I'm not going to bother him until the next day, that without being mandated or having someone tell me you should do that. But that's a utopia world.
Well, it is. And just remember, for every rule or law, somebody did something stupid. None of this stuff comes out of nowhere, right? No matter how draconian and foolish the law is, somewhere somebody did something bad enough that it needed to be addressed.
Like the McDonald's coffee, that lady who burned herself, and now all the coffees have to say hot. It's like, did you think you're ordering cold coffee? But now McDonald's had to go print all those cups to say, warning, hot coffee.
But there's stuff that appears obvious. Every rule makes perfect sense to the person who made the rule. Mm-hmm. They know why they did it, but it's not always obvious. And okay, I'm only going to send between 9 and 4. But what if I have to send my message to the whole team and one person's on the West Coast and one person's in LA? That rule ain't going to work, right? So you have to talk about it. Hey, if you get a message and you're not on the clock yet, answer it when you're on the clock, but you got to have that conversation.
Well, you could also put it in your subject line as well. You could put the subject line said, read and reply within 24 hours.
Absolutely. We have a thing where we'll often say right in the subject line, don't panic. And then I'll ask the question, or by tomorrow, whatever, so that when people are going through, because I carry a little weight in the organization, people tend to get a little nervous when they get emails from me, unless I tell them, don't be nervous about this.
So what is your role? I mean, I know who you work for, but what is your role in terms of the organizational chart?
I don't have a heavy line responsibility with anybody, but I have a lot of dotted line responsibilities. I lead a lot of project teams where I'm not that person's real boss, but I got to get stuff done. And my role, technically, this sounds very impressive, is the subject matter expert for remote and the evolving workplace. Kevin Eikenberry Group does leadership training across the whole spectrum. My specialty, if you want to call it that, is remote work and communication. But that means we're designing courseware and we're talking to clients and we're doing all kinds of stuff with big old dotted line responsibilities.
Well, my dotted line is me and my wife. She does all the editing of the podcast and everything on the back end, and I'm the content creator. But I try to create this podcast so it could help anyone, no matter if you're at a big company, if you're a solopreneur, or somewhere in between. Because I promise you, if you're a solopreneur and you're thinking to yourself, how did this show help me? Then you missed it. You have to go back and listen to the beginning, because Kevin dropped a lot of wisdom that applies to any size organization. So before we wrap this up, I want to give you one final question. And that question is there anything that we didn't get a chance to talk about on the show today that you really feel on your heart that would benefit the listener?
Yeah, I think so. And here it is. We've been talking like, okay, you work remotely or you work in the office, but a lot of people are in this return to office 3 days in, 2 days out kind of thing. And they call that hybrid work. And it's actually not hybrid work. What that is a hostage negotiation.
Okay.
What that is the company says, hey, we want people in the office, but if we bring them in every day, they'll quit. So how much can we make them come in? And the employees say, we hate going to the office, but we have to go in enough that they don't fire us. And they settle on 3 days a week, and that kind of works. But that's not a real hybrid is two things that create a third thing. You're a good Texas boy. A mule is a horse and a donkey. But if you know anything about mules, mules are mules. They are not horses and they are not donkeys. Mules are their own thing. Hybrid work is not just what work gets done where, but when. And so the idea of what needs to be done at the same time as everybody else, what needs to be done synchronously, what needs to be done asynchronously, opens the door for some really creative ways to work as a team, as opposed to just trying to replicate the office environment with webcams. So I would urge, if you're thinking about coming back to the office and you're thinking about a hybrid situation, why? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And start with what is the work that needs to be done and what's the best way to do it, and then worry about where it happens.
Good point. And you mentioned return to office. So here's my little rant about return to office. I'm through and through an Apple fanboy. I have all the products. I love Apple. But one thing that really irritates me about Apple is they built this $5 quadrillion spaceship over in Cupertino. When COVID hit, everybody worked from home. And now they want to bring everyone mandatory back to the office, but yet they still do their keynotes via pre-recorded. So I'm like, okay, Apple, if you're really going to bring people back to office, start doing your events live like Google and Microsoft do. So that kind of like, to me, it's like, it's inauthentic because you're saying come back to the office, but we're not going to have in-person live keynotes. It's like, okay, well, either go all in or not. I think the reason why is because Google had that issue where they're working on something and it wasn't working. So Apple's kind of paranoid. So it's just one of my pet peeves. If you're saying come back to the office, but we're not going to come back to the office in terms of our presentations.
Yeah, I mean, Starbucks just mandated all office staff need to go back 5 days a week. But by the way, the CEO lives in Huntington Beach, California, and he's not going to Seattle every day. As much as I am death to the suits, as much as any bomb-throwing radical, I'm willing to give them a little bit of grace because we are in the middle of the kind of seismic upheaval that we saw in the 1920s and 30s, where we moved to a 5-day work week and a 40-hour week, and we started commuting to offices instead of being on the farm. And there was all this change, and it caused all kinds of things that nobody anticipated. And some of them were fabulous and great, and some of them were not so swell. Well, we're in the middle of that now. What does it mean to go to work if you don't physically go to work? How much of your life do you owe to the person who pays you? What do they owe you, and what do you owe them? That social contract is undergoing a huge change.
Agreed.
And it's going to take some time. And, it started, COVID pushed it across the Rubicon. And if it wasn't COVID, it would have been something else. Because every kind of change like this needs a seismic event. That happened to be ours. And so it's going to take a couple of years for this all to shake out, and people will figure out, I like going to the office. I don't like going to the office. I have the kind of job that I can work from home. I'm early in my career. I want to be in the office to network and learn stuff. I'm late in my career. I don't ever want to be CEO. Just give me my work and I'll sit on my deck and do it. But we're figuring this out as we go. Nobody has this figured out yet. So give them some patience, because a lot of those people with back to office mandates, Amazon just said everybody go back 5 days, and there's drama and people are freaking out. You know what? Talk to me in a year and a half and tell me what that looks like.
Fascinating conversation today, Wayne. I'm so glad you came on the show. Where can people go to find out more about you and what you're doing in the world?
LinkedIn is great. I'm a shameless LinkedIn connector. Feel free to be in my orbit. Kevin Eikenberry Group is kevineikenberry.com, EIKENBERRY.com. That's where you can find out all the training and consulting that we do. And if you want to go to our podcast page, which also links to all of our books, longdistanceworklife.com/LDL will take you to our podcast and our books.
Excellent. And after you go to those three websites of Wayne's, hop on over to my website, MrProductivity.com, MISTER, MrProductivity.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, don't forget, be productive, but most importantly, be positive.